Hello and welcome back to the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation podcast, where we spark bold conversations about building a public sector that truly works for citizens. I'm your host today, Bukky Akinsemoyin, Director of Funding and Partnerships at the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation. At the foundation, we believe sustainable progress doesn't happen in silos. It takes partnerships where government, businesses and citizens work together to solve challenges. In our last episode, we talked about how partnerships can go beyond corporate charity into genuine co-created initiatives. Today, we're taking that conversation a bit further, from partnerships on projects to partnerships in policy. Why does this matter? It matters because when the private sector isn't at the policy table, everyone feels it. Think of the expatriate employment levy introduced earlier this year.
It sparked massive pushback and was paused within a week.
That episode showed two things. Policymaking without consultation creates more problems than solutions. And yet, when the government listens, it opens the door to better outcomes. That's why I'm excited about the partnership between the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation, the Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation, and the Oil Producers Trade Section, OPTS, and the Lagos Business School. Together, we recently trained over 100 federal civil service directors on policy design and policy review, equipping them to manage the entire policy lifecycle with more inclusivity and effectiveness. So today, I'll be talking with two leading voices about lessons from the past, challenges of the present, and the future we can build if government and businesses shift from a regulator dynamic to becoming true co-creators of policy. Our first guest today is Professor Franklin Ngwu. Professor Franklin Ngwu is an economist, chartered risk manager, and professor of strategic management and governance at Lagos Business School, Pan-Atlantic University, where he also directs the public sector initiative. He holds a PhD in law and economics of banking regulation. With over 20 years experience in academia, consulting, and policy advisory across Africa and the UK, he has advised leading Nigerian institutions, including the Central Bank of Nigeria, Stanbic IBTC, First Bank of Nigeria, Guarantee Trust Bank, Banwa Ighodalo, Nigeria Stock Exchange, Nigerian Breweries PLC, Kocharis Group, Sterling Bank, Paystack Payments Limited, Electronic Pay Plus Limited, Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, NMDPRA, and Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, amongst several others. He has authored 4 governance and sustainability books, 2 of them are forthcoming, and serves on several boards. He is the co-chair of the UN SDGs for Private Sector Advisory Group Board. He's an independent non-executive director of Caritas Nigeria, an advisory board member of leading Edge Consulting Services, and a member of professional bodies including the IOD Nigeria, Society of Corporate Governance Nigeria, British Academy of Management, and the World Economic Forum. Professor Ngwu, I have to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
We also have Mr. Umar Hassan Hadejia, Senior Manager at the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC.
Umar Hassan Hadejia is a seasoned oil and gas professional and ICT expert with over 15 years of experience spanning Nigeria's upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors. Currently serving as a senior manager at the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, he oversees strategic oil and gas data management and licensing processes, driving transparency and efficiency in the sector. With a strong academic background that includes an MSc in Oil and Gas Management from Coventry University, a Master's in International Affairs and Diplomacy, and professional certificates in energy, Umar brings a unique blend of technical expertise, policy insights, and regulatory experience. He is also an alumnus of the AIG Public Leaders Program. A professional recognized for integrity and excellence, Umar has been instrumental in shaping Nigeria's oil and gas regulatory landscape through digital transformation, data-driven decision-making, and strategic public-private collaborations. Umar, it is a pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, there's a widespread perception that policymaking is usually government-led. The government makes the rules, and industry must follow. A sort of top-down command and control approach, sometimes creating distance instead of collaboration. I'd love to hear your reflections from your vantage point inside government. What do you think drove that approach historically, and how is that changing today?
Okay, thank you. Historically, laws are implemented through the development of regulation and to interpret acts. However, policy making in the Nigerian oil and gas industry has indeed departed from being government controlled to a partnership. The Nigerian government has in contemporary times taken deliberate actions to ensure that policies are collaborative. This is indeed a paradigm shift, as accelerating regulatory and fiscal reforms are necessary to attract investments. At this point, I want to talk to the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021, which is a game changer. Before then, government solely developed regulations to operationalize oil and gas laws. However, specifically, Section 216 of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021 changed the whole game, which makes it a requirement for before regulations are operationalized. Regulations must be subjected to stakeholder consultations, usually achieved through public hearings. At the end of the day, all parties become owners of such regulation, understanding it in and out and knowing why certain decisions were made. Because historically, part of the gaps identified was that the players did not understand the interpretation of the laws as laid out by government. This initiative has indeed closed the gaps, and we are now on the same page. The government did not stop there. As you know, even though I operate in the oil and gas industry, we all know that we appreciate that data is the new oil. The Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, through the National Data Repository, ensures that reliable data is available for collaboration. The advantage of having reliable data to make informed decisions cannot be overemphasized, because the oil and gas business is a very high risk and high return venture. So you need all the comfort you can get. And that is where reliable data comes in. Advantages of having reliable data include having the accuracy of making decisions, informed decisions, correct decisions, that is reducing uncertainty, and also shortens the oil and gas development life cycle, which dovetails into lowering of production cost per barrel, which is the intention of government, making oil and gas production as low as possible. In fact, one of the mandates of the National Data Repository, which is where I currently work, is to come up with and support initiatives that will promote oil and gas development in Nigeria. Specifically, Section 2J of the National Data Repository Regulations 2020, which is in public domain, specifies the need for that support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Umar. Yes, indeed, data is the new oil, especially when it's reliable and it can be leveraged for informed decision making. And I also like to say thank you for breaking down the Petroleum Industry Act 2021, the PIA Act, from your perspective. Professor, our research at the Foundation on why reforms fail confirms this disconnect. we found that 76% of our non-state actor respondents, comprising businesses, civil society organizations, and citizens from all 6 geopolitical zones of the country, believe the government doesn't involve them enough in policy making. And strikingly, more than half of the government officials we surveyed admitted that citizen involvement is often dismissed as lacking expertise. This suggests that even when consultations happen, they can feel symbolic, a bit like a box ticking exercise rather than a true co-creation exercise. Now, from an academic perspective, why does this model persist, and what mindset shift is needed to move towards real partnership?
Thank you for the question. I think that it is a challenge that we have not only in Nigeria, but in many developing and emerging economies. But particularly in Nigeria we can say that the citizens believe that the government should engage them more, but the government believe also that their previous engagement, they didn't receive enough feedback from the citizens. And from my experience, or from what we've been doing in the public sector initiative, there seems to be a disconnect in the sense that the public agencies, sometimes they say that they advertise or they invite the citizens, but those that normally attend are not the quality of citizens that are looking for. They are not they don't get the right feedback. And that's the reason why they have the perception that they don't really have the expertise. But interestingly, the public officers are also citizens. So, for instance, if you're in the electricity sector, if they are doing something, maybe in transport, you can participate as a citizen. If they are doing something in health, even though you are in the electricity sector, you can go and participate as a citizen in the power sector or in any other sector. So what it means is that if we believe that citizens are not bringing the right expertise, it now comes to the way we're engaging the citizens. And in the sense that there's some work we did for an agency in the power sector, and they complained that most of the time when they do stakeholders engagement or citizens engagement, there are only few people attend. And we now carried out a further research on the reasons why this is so. And we asked them, how do they normally invite citizens? And they said that they normally place the adverts maybe on trained Nigerian newspapers, physical copies of the newspapers. And the question then is, how many Nigerians still buy physical copies of our newspapers? And how do they engage? And all that. So when we now also spoke to some people in the areas that they were conducting this engagement, many of the citizens said that they didn't even get the information at all. And so most of the time, the people that might likely attend are those who might be going there that are not properly informed, but maybe they just see it as an opportunity, maybe to interact, or maybe even to have something to go home with. So it means that the public agencies need to rethink the strategy or the approaches that they use in engaging the citizens. In some other instances, when they now do in terms of proper invitations across the different segments of the society, religious bodies, youth bodies, civil society organizations, and properly invite them, the discussions are normally very robust and normally very insightful. So the perception that there is a lack of expertise or lack of knowledge on the citizens' side is misplaced and flawed, in the sense that those that we are saying that they don't have the expertise are also the people who actually manage the other agencies. So there is a need to a kind of reorientation, not only on the citizen side, but also on the government side, in terms of the way they engage the citizens, in terms of the quality of people that they're looking for, in terms of the timing, in terms of the way, the places that they hold these engagements and all that. So if we look, for instance, on Sundays or on Fridays, our mosques and our churches are normally filled up. So the question is, if we want to do an engagement, can we engage the religious bodies to help us to ensure proper engagement? Or if we want to do get the youths? Can we get the youth bodies to invite all the relevant people across the different youth segments to discuss with them? So I think it's something that we can quickly and easily correct with a reorientation, advocacy, publicity, and maybe further engagement with the citizens to correct this impression. Because when they engage in some of the ones that I've attended, it's normally very robust, it's normally very engaging, and it's normally you get a lot of feedback on better ways to formulate the policies and on better ways to also even execute the policies. And of course, when you do that, you get better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you for that detailed and very interesting response, Professor Ngwu. I think one of the things you've clearly highlighted is there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between citizens' needs and what the government is trying to achieve in terms of policy making. And you've even taken it further to talk about, the need for more targeted stakeholder engagement, advocacy, and collaboration. I think in terms of stakeholder engagement, it's really interesting when you talked about, putting out adverts or posts in the newspapers. So maybe it's moving from traditional media and moving some of this onto the digital media where we know our youths are well represented. Also speaking to a diverse set of stakeholders, churches, schools, and different sets of stakeholders in their diverse spaces. So be it a mosque on a Friday or a church on a Sunday. So these are all approaches that can be used. So thank you for that response. Okay, so Umar, building on that, as an evidence-driven organization, we have been gathering data on how reforms in Nigeria can be better designed to ensure sustainability, relevance, and efficiency. Following the survey responses received from state and non-state actors, we went into conducting focus group discussions with diverse stakeholders in the media, academia, private sector, public service, and civil society. One concern stood out. Many policies are drafted with good intentions, but without a deep understanding of the day-to-day realities citizens face. Umar, that's a really critical point. I mean, policymakers often have the macroeconomic view, but not always the lived realities of the people for whom they are making these policies. From your experience, what makes it hardest to capture those on-the-ground realities? Things like the impact of fuel price hike on small business owners when formulating policies, as an example.
Thank you once again. As I earlier said, I believe there has been a paradigm shift in the oil and gas sector post-PIA, post-Petroleum Industry Act. And I strongly believe that the days of government having unilateral views are now in the past. You may recall that the Petroleum Industry Act itself was subjected to several public hearings over the years. Right from the early 2000s, when the Oil and Gas Reforms Implementation Committee, OGISP, headed by the late Dr. Rilwan Lukman, was initiated, up till the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act in 2021. This is over 2 decades and spans different dispensations, and there were several public hearings conducted. So at least this makes this this act very robust. And of course, that makes people to understand the law more and more prior to the ones earlier before now. So this leads to favorable investment decisions, because the more you understand what it takes or what is required of you, the better you're able to implement and make informed decisions. Let me touch on the issue of the fuel prices you mentioned. With the removal of the fuel subsidy by this dispensation, market forces now determine the price of fuel and not government. Therefore, it is easy for business owners to forecast and make informed decisions, as being practiced in other climes. And the policy in the oil and gas industry is now more collaborative and not being micromanaged. I would implore you to attend these stakeholder engagements that lead to the formation of regulations, and you would appreciate what I'm saying, because you would have exploration and production companies, oil servicing companies, journalists, and even the academia. Everybody is free to come and air their views and make input to the eventual regulation. And I mean, the importance of that cannot be overemphasized for collaboration. And when I'm speaking about the requirement for public hearing before regulations are passed, that does not have to do with the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission alone. Even the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority is expected to do the same. Now, let me cast a searchlight on the licensing round regulations, which is an outcome of the PIA, an output of the PIA. It was passed, one of the first regulations that was passed in the year 2022. According to Section 6 of the Licensing Round Regulations 2022, before any licensing round is conducted, the Commission must publish on its website, 2 national dailies and 2 international newspapers, the intent to conduct that licensing round. That way, the public is well aware it is not done secretly. So, to further appreciate this particular licensing round requirement, Sections 73 to 76 of the Petroleum Industry Act mandates and specifies how licensing rounds are conducted to ensure that they are free, fair, open, and competitive. Now, it is worthy of mention that there are 2 ways one can acquire an asset in Nigeria: through the licensing rounds and through the assignment of interest. So, back to the licensing rounds. Section 75 of the Petroleum Industry Act specifically mandates the Commission to have a dedicated licensing round regulation called Licensing Round Regulation 2022. That is what led to the development of the Licensing Round Regulation 2022, because it was a requirement in the Act. So, apart from the fact that you are supposed to develop regulations, specifically the PIA spoke to the need to make sure that urgently the licensing regulation is put in place, just to ensure fairness, equity, transparency, and all parties are carried along. This led to 2 licensing rounds that were conducted after the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act, which is the 2022/2023 mini bid round and the Nigerian 2024 licensing round, which climaxed through a well-publicized commercial bid conference that was held on the 18th of December 2024 to the satisfaction of bidders. Because of the transparency and openness, everybody was there to witness how it went about. Another important regulation which was developed is the Assignment of Interest Regulation 2024, which is in compliance with Section 95 of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021. So Section 95 says there specifies that there are rules and ways interests are assigned. Let me explain what assignment of interest refers to. So, apart from licensing round, if somebody owns an asset and wants to divest it to someone else, and he has gotten somebody that is interested in that asset, there are rules as to how that assignment of interest is done. And of course, the Commission further broke that down after the Assignment of Interest Regulation 2024 with 7 pillars of divestment, all towards making it open and making it clear what you need to do. So this is very collaborative. Furthermore, to sustain transparency and ownership in production accounting in conformance with the Petroleum Industry Act, the Commission on a monthly basis publishes concession situation report. This details the asset ownership status of all licensed oil and gas assets down to the last equity. So by the PIA says the public should know who owns what equity in what asset that has been licensed. That is done monthly so that everybody is on the same page. and everybody knows who owns what, not shrouded in secrecy. And there is also the oil production status report, which accounts for the amount of crude oil and condensates produced by each at each facility. These informations are open to the public. Another giant stride that depicts equity of government, equity and fairness in government dealings is the fact that even in the last licensing rounds that were conducted, which is public information, which you can see on our website, even the NNPC, which is the National Oil Company, had to come and participate to acquire assets like every other operator. So government did not even give its national oil agency any preference in the last licensing round, and it was open to the public. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Umar. I think what you've done there is you've really broken down and detailed, things like around the framework, the guidelines, and I think especially it is good to know that all this information is publicly available on platforms and your website. So that's, I think our listeners will appreciate knowing that if they don't already. Okay, so Professor Ngwu, let's zoom out from the immediate operational challenges. Policies don't just affect balance sheets, they ripple into jobs, communities, and citizens' lives. That human cost often gets lost in policy conversations. So we saw this clearly with the total fuel subsidy removal. Many Nigerians felt immediately burdened as transport and food costs rose, long before any relief measures were even set in place. What this highlighted is the trade-offs between short-term pain and long-term gain, and the question of how to better involve stakeholders and manage policy formulations and rollouts. So when policies are designed without inputs of those on ground, what unintended human or economic costs tend to emerge? And could you maybe share a recent example of a policy or a reform that looked good on paper, but created unexpected challenges in practice, whether for businesses, workers, or even local communities?
So I think that it is also important that we are elected, or maybe that we are privileged to serve in a public agency. I mean, it doesn't mean that we are now higher or better off than those that have not been elected or appointed or selected. And that is one of the ways that we are supposed to help to resolve some of these issues. So if you talked about the fuel subsidy. Before the present government came into office, there were debates on whether fuel subsidy should be removed or not removed. I mean, many people saw the reasons why fuel subsidy should be removed. So it was believed that the level of corruption and in terms of government revenue and all that these are the reasons justifying fuel subsidy removal. However, when the way it was removed and the time it was removed did not give enough room for proper preparation, for proper planning. So it was removed just on the day of swearing in, which now it wasn't what the people were expected from the day one of the government. So that sent it was a shock to the economy, which now led to unintended or unplanned consequences in the sense that transport people suddenly just increased their prices, even the market women, because of course of the central nature of fuel in Nigerian economic activities. So of course it will now lead to increase in school fees, increase in everything. It led to inflation and all that. So those are the kind of costs that you see. So I will use another example. It's the same thing as when Naira was floated. So there was no debate whether Naira was undervalued or overvalued. It was clear that there is a need to be an adjustment with regards to our exchange rate, because the official rate was about 4 and something before this government came in, while the parallel rate was about 7 and something. So the gap was much, and it gave room for arbitrage and people leveraging on that opportunity to not to be productive, but just to move money from the official rate to the black market rate, and you make money. So at the same time, it was known that something needs to be done, but the way it was done, in terms of just getting up in the morning and saying Naira has been floated, of course, again, it led to unintended consequences. In addition to removing the fuel subsidy suddenly, Naira was removed suddenly, so which, when you combine both policy announcements, it sent big shocks to the economy that led to unbelievable inflation, and which really caused a lot of issues, family issues, business issues, non-profit business issues, and all that, because everything just went haywire. So we moved from a black market rate of 7 and something Naira to a black market rate to a rate of almost close to 2,000. So, which clearly indicates that this policy was not properly executed in terms of the time and the way it was announced. Many people advocated that the right thing that we needed was what we call a managed float. And it was not even necessary to announce it the way it was announced and the way it was announced, which now led to so many consequences. So on paper, it wasn't what was, I'm not sure that the government intended to cause more pain to the public, but that's the impact of such approaches to policy announcement and policy implementation. Again, we can also remember prior to the election, we had the Naira redesign policy, which the intention was more or less to curb or to reduce the money in circulation, and to now make sure that all the money that they are being used for legal and productive activities are allowed to stay, but those that are being used for illegal or criminal activities might be taken out. So that was one of the reasons that we had the Naira redesign. So on paper, it was clear that when implemented, that this can give good benefits to the economy. Naira will moderate, inflation will reduce, insecurity will reduce, among other benefits. At the same time, the way it was announced and implemented sent shockwaves across the economy, because people were not prepared for such. And we now had people queuing to get Naira, foods that you couldn't buy things. It led to also inflation, it led to fights, it led to people, quarreling, it led to social disorganizations and all that. So, and so many other policy announcements in Nigeria have taken this kind of approach. So and that's why I'm saying that it is important that this flawed perception really, that if you are now elected into an office, or if you are appointed into an office, and there's this perception that you are now maybe possibly more intelligent, possibly more knowledgeable than those that have not been elected. I think it's something that we also need, maybe National Orientation Agency or other agents of the government need to re-emphasize that we are all citizens of Nigeria and we all have the right to participate in policy formulation and policy execution. And then the need for robust engagement of the citizens by the government. And I will say that the blame should go more to the government and the agencies in terms of the way they engage the public. I think it's something that we can improve upon so that we reduce this unintended consequence. But at the end of the day, sometimes the lack in policy announcement and policy impact can be long, and it can cause serious consequences that might not be able to control. So at the moment, we have Naira at maybe 1,500 Naira to $1. We have the fuel issues, and now other issues which shouldn't have been there. So Could we have had a better outcome? Yes, we could have had a better outcome with fuel subsidy, with the exchange rate, than what we have at the moment. But what we have at the moment can be attributed to the way the policies were announced and implemented, which lacked proper stakeholders and citizens engagement on the best way to execute it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that detailed response, Professor Ngwu. I think one of the things you've described here is what some of our economists and even analysts are calling the twin shocks. So in terms of the fuel subsidy and also foreign exchange adjustments, twin shocks, because it's, like I said, happened at the same time. Again, just so, one of the points he kept saying was that all the reasons look good on paper, in terms of corruption, etc. Look good on paper, but the unexpected challenges and shock has been felt across the country and still being felt across the country. Okay, so my next question is, in your view, how can ministries build stronger mechanisms to assess and mitigate human impacts before policies are finalized?
Okay, thank you for that. The keywords are collaboration and sustained engagement. That way, through collaboration, all stakeholders are part of a process. The slogan used to be that regulators are strict and are only trying to identify faults or to make sure that everybody is in line with the law. However, the Commission has shifted from that. The Commission is a business enabler and opportunity providers. That is captured in the core values of the Commission, which has to do with transparency, responsiveness, ownership, and integrity. So the organization makes deliberate effort. The government makes deliberate effort to respond to the requests of stakeholders. And remember, the regulator has a bird's eye view of the industry. So, we as government ensure that we share experiences among stakeholders and use that to guide stakeholders, so that at the end of the day, we want you to be able to operate well and be able to achieve your aim. Because once you're able to produce, the government and the people are beneficiaries. But stakeholders also need to be responsive. Whenever there's an engagement and it's been publicized in compliance with the PIA, we need to attend and be participatory. All stakeholders need to come on board and be participatory, rather than to wait till after regulations are passed, then you come out to criticize. That doesn't help you and that doesn't help the system. So come and be part of it. That is why the organization complies with the law and makes sure that everybody is carried on board, everybody is notified, and ensure that everybody is duly and fairly considered in making decisions. And please, we also urge stakeholders to always have an open mind and be reasonable, because the regulators are also here on behalf of the largest group of stakeholders. That is the entirety of the Nigerian population. So whenever we take decisions with over 200 million Nigerians in mind. Furthermore, the Commission has a dedicated and very active Servicom unit. And there is the inquiry management system accessible on our website, where you can go and make inquiries. If you have any challenges, you can go and report it. If you are not getting the service you require or are not getting the clarification you require, you can report there. Because aside we technical people doing our technical and policy work, Servicom is supposed to ensure that what we are doing, are the stakeholders getting the response they require? Are they satisfied? And we have also a lot of dedicated phone lines accessible on our website to be able to attend to clarifications and requests. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I heard your call to action there, as I myself am a stakeholder and a citizen, and I hear that call to action that stakeholders and citizens need to be more proactive, not reactive, not waiting for when these regulations have been passed. So early engagement is critical, and also thank you for sharing some of the ways that we can engage early. Okay, but of course not all stories are negative. So we are seeing some encouraging shifts. I think the government is taking lessons and, pivoting its approach. The past has been about a relationship built on mistrust and mandates. The government will say, do this, and the private sector would try to react. The expatriate employment levy was a classic example of policy gone wrong before consultation. The tax reform, a more recent reform, prioritized stakeholder engagement. And this showed us what's possible when governments genuinely engages stakeholders. This signals that we're entering hopefully signals that we're entering a new and more hopeful era with priority on stakeholder engagement in policymaking. So, Professor, in practice, what would meaningful early inclusion of the private sector in policymaking look like? Not just consultation, but actual genuine collaboration. What would that look like from your own perspective?
I think that let's take it a bit, let's go back a little bit in the sense that during elections, politicians go around the country or go around the states or go around the senatorial zones and local governments campaigning, and of course during campaigns they promise a lot, and they will do this, they will do that, they will do this, they will do that. But at the end of the day, when elections are won or when elections are over, there seems to be a lack of continuation of what have been promised and all that. So what we are supposed to do first is to say, how do we even formulate our policies? So I think that's the first stage that we're supposed to look at and say, is it possible for policies to be, first of all, take into consideration what the respective cities, regions or states in Nigeria, what they are saying. So, because at the end of the day, we're running a federal system of government, and because we have what we call a very plural society, the needs of people in Sokoto might be different from the needs of people in Bayelsa, and the needs of people in Adamawa will be different from the people in Ondo State or in Enugu or in Benue, as the case may be, which now demands or requires a more robust engagement to say, what are your needs? So it's expected that after elections or during the campaigns, the promises, the engagements are noted in terms of what the respective areas of the country are asking for. And it should now be used to re-engage the people immediately after elections, immediately government starts, to now say, okay, these are some of the things we discussed during the campaigns. Now that we are in government, are these still the things you need? Are we supposed? How are the best ways to do it? For the areas required that are more or less common across the country. Of course, just as they did with the tax issues, they went around the different regions of Nigeria, got feedbacks from southwest to south, southeast, northwest, northeast, and north central, and got feedbacks across Nigeria. So for policies that are general and common across board, that's the right way to go about it. But for policies that are region or that are specific to certain regions or certain senatorial zones or certain states, that's what we are supposed to do. And then with this feedback, the government agencies can now go back and refine the policies, because it means that there is a sense of ownership and there's a sense of responsibility on both the government and the citizens. And once we're able to do that, it means that when the policies are now implemented, the level of involvement and ownership will be there to drive the policies. So I think that's where we are supposed to start from, and then build up to ensure that the private sector, because if we're talking about public-private sector-led initiative or public-private sector development issues, when you do this kind of engagement, the private sector are already aware of where the government is going. There is something in economics, mainly monetary economy, that they've called forward guidance. Forward guidance means that, for instance, central bank comes out and say, in this year or in next year, inflation rate will be XYZ, interest rate will be XYZ, and they tell the people where they are going. So in governance, there's also need for government to provide that kind of guidance to say, in next year, next 2 years, this is what we are trying to achieve. These are the areas we are going to prioritize. And then encourage and call upon the private sector to partner with them in that direction. So even when you're doing strategies for private sector organization, they really know where the government is going, and they can now key in and say, okay, these are the areas we are going. But in a situation whereby the government is not providing the proper guidance to the private sector, it becomes a bit difficult for them to even partner or for them to even catch up with the way the government is doing, the way the government is going. So what is required is this segmented or stage managed approach to policy development, policy execution, citizens engagement, private sector engagement and participation, to ensure that we actually achieve what we can call sustainable and inclusive development. But if you don't do it, the private sector and the citizens more or less react to the policies of the government, and which decreases the sense of ownership and involvement and participation, of course, which now leads to limited outcome. But where you have proper engagement, inclusiveness, engagement, and participation on both the citizens and the private sector, the sense of responsibility and ownership will be there, which will drive a better outcome, which will also enhance development of more policies that will sustain the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ngwu. Thank you for that. Again, that word keeps coming up, stakeholder engagement, and you talked about, election cycle while they're electioneering and going around, politicians going around sharing their mandates and sharing their promises. It couldn't be more apt than this period we're in, because very shortly we're coming into that season again of campaigns and electioneering, and it's and I think you've taken it further, that it's not just stakeholder engagements during elections, but it's the continuation of the stakeholder engagements, the buy-in, advocacy, ownership, not just with citizens, with private sector, segmenting who the beneficiaries of these policies are, and just making sure that there is some sort of a continuation. Okay, so let's dream big, Professor. The tax reform has showed us that by working hand in hand, the government gets more practical policies, and the private sector gets a stable, predictable environment to invest and thrive in. So stakeholder engagement has an immense impact in cutting back the issue of public resistance. If we truly move from the regulator-regulated dynamic to co-creation, what impact could that have on Nigeria's energy security, investment climate, and then even public trust in government?
It will significantly lead to better outcomes, better involvement, participation, inclusive governance, and growth. I think that across Nigeria, it is very evident that people want better government, people or citizens engagement. They want better government, private sector engagement. They want better governance outcomes, and they believe that if there are more engagement, more involvement, that the outcomes will be better. So it's a public knowledge that a higher public citizens engagement will deliver better governance outcomes. And if this is what the government wants, if the government wants also more better governance outcomes, and the citizens are saying that they believe that this is the right way to go about it, I think it is something that the government should take set as a priority in terms of how do they re-engage and re-engage and re-engage the citizens and also the approaches that they are using. As I said, one of the agencies in the power sector, they use, or they claim that they use, just adverts in newspapers. But the question again is, how many people still buy newspapers? So it requires a rethink of the approach that they are using, a rethink of the strategy that they are using to be able to achieve the right outcome that they want. And moreover is, how do we ensure that these things are not just, we say it, we discuss it, but it's not properly embedded across the different government agencies and levels of government. So I think that what is also required is, how do we embed these suggestions? How do we institutionalize it in our levels of government, federal government, state government, local government, and also judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. Because unless and until there is this consensus across these levels and agencies of government, we will still be having this kind of challenges. Because we live in an interconnected society, an interconnected world, which requires, there's supposed to be a synergy across different levels and agencies of the government. So if we're able to embed it, so it becomes the culture of governance, I think that it will lead to significant improvement in service delivery, in governance outcomes, in productivity, and in sustainable economic growth and development of Nigeria. It will lead to poverty reduction, insecurity will go down, and it will also support coordination across different government agencies. Because there we know that what they're about to do, that they've received the required input and contributions from the relevant stakeholders or relevant segments of the society. And at the end of the day, it will be better for all. So it is we in the private sector, we also have a role to play in terms of demanding more engagement, that when policies come out, we might not need to wait for government to invite us. We might need to start asking questions and say, how do we get involved in the discussion before the policies are concluded, announced, and implemented? So I think that for us to achieve this kind of governance, all the parties, all the stakeholders, we need to improve on what we are currently doing, as we all want a better Nigeria that is more inclusive, that is more growing and sustainably growing as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ngwu. I like that. Instead of a wait and see approach, let's not wait and see. Let's get involved from the start and let's start asking those questions. And again, using that word, becoming more engaged and not waiting to be asked to be engaged. So thank you very much. I think you've shared some really valuable insights. Very interesting, very open and honest insights as well. So thank you. We do appreciate that. Okay, but before we close, let's just get practical here.
Mr. Umar,
what are 2 priority actions for government to signal that it is ready to move from being just a regulator to a true partner?
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say that there needs to be more collaboration among stakeholders. That is, the public and private sectors need to have sustained collaboration. And the gains achieved in the oil and gas industry need to be cascaded to other sectors of government. That's taking a cue from the petroleum industry. For instance, the gains of the Petroleum Industry Act should be harnessed by other sectors. This will lead to more clarification, and in our own sector, lead to more clarity in how regulations are arrived at, and everybody would own it. Secondly, awareness is very critical of the content of the laws of the land, because the more stakeholders understand the laws, the easier it will be to abide by them and implement them. And this will make stakeholder engagement more efficient and less argumentative, thereby leading to amicable development of implementable regulations. This will yield faster development of operational regulations. So far, if you go to the Commission's website, you will see that 20 regulations have been gazetted, while others are in various stages of being passed. So the more people understand, the faster we'll be able to get this over and operational. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar. So yes, that's very important. Private sector engagement, collaboration, and awareness of what's going on. Okay, so thanks very much for that. And I'd like to ask you, Professor Ngwu, what 2 key recommendations would you give to the private sector to become a more constructive partner to government? What are the 2 key recommendations you would give?
First recommendation I will give is that there needs to be more interest in what the government is doing on the part of the private sector, and in the sense that the private sector seems to be segmented, operating more in silos. So if it's something happening in the financial services sector, maybe people in the logistics sector might not really be interested as people in the financial services. And then it means that the body or the institution or the agency that will be required or that can be used to engage the government might just be the agency that is in that sector. So if it's for instance financial services, maybe it will be the CIB, Exchange of Bankers of Nigeria, or maybe the PENUP, people in the pension sector and all that. So there is need for more interest and active interest on the part of the private sector on what is going on in government. The second one will be, how can the private sector coordinate themselves to see themselves as one body, one group, fighting or advocating or pushing for better synergy between the government and the private sector for the overall interest of all Nigerians. So, as we all know, we have different professional groups coordinating the private sector. So in the banking, we have, for instance, CIBN. In governance, we have, for instance, IOD. In accounting, we have ICANN. We have NECA in terms of HR and employment issues. We have NESG for engaging the government. But the question is, how are all these private sector organizations, how are they being coordinated, and how are we creating synergy so that they can actually proactively engage the government? So the first one is having more interest, being aware, being conscious of what is going on, not just in your sector, but across board. And not only being aware, but being aware of what is going on globally, being aware of what is going on in Africa, being aware of what is going on in Nigeria, being aware of what is going on in your sector. Because in our own work in public sector initiative and also in LBS, when you engage certain people, you find out that they can be better with more awareness of what is going on in the area. So we have to move away from being reactive to being a bit more proactive in terms of engaging the government. The second one is then the synergy across these different professional associations I've mentioned. In the sense that if it's something affecting the pension industry, it shouldn't be left or pen up alone. Because at the end of the day, they are all connected. What happens in the pension industry can have influence or impact on the insurance sector, will have influence on the transport sector, will have influence on the agricultural sector, will have influence on the financial services sector. So it means that there's supposed to be more synergy across these different segments of the society. Because whatever concerns one will affect the other one. And if the government perceives them as being very coordinated, of course, there will be more response from the government, there will be more engagement from the government. So if government sees now that something that happens in the financial services industry, that people even in maritime, they are interested. People even in in logistics, they are interested. People even in health, they are interested. People even in manufacturing, they are interested. I believe that the government will listen more. So there's supposed to be, there's a need for more coordination and more relationship, more synergy across the different segments of the private sector, starting from their sectoral agencies or sectoral professional associations, to now have a kind of body, a kind of association that incorporates all the different segments and that will be truly representative of the different segments of the private sector, and that will be particularly focused on promoting public-private sector engagement, participation, governance, and leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ngwu. I think for a very clear breakdown of what needs to be done in terms of the private sector, them taking more of an active interest in what is going on in the government. I guess they are, but you've used the word more of an active interest. Also, the private sector, I liked what you said about private sector coming together and creating more synergies. It doesn't matter what sectors they're in, but working across sectors, coming together as a group to advocate for citizens and the nations so that we can have even more of the listening ears of our government.
What a really, really inspiring conversation we just had. And I want to thank you both again, Professor Ngwu and Mr. Umar, for you've given us a candid look and even provided somewhat of an analytical framework that is going to help us understand how to bridge these gaps.
And this is the reason why we go into partnerships with, people like partnerships with you, with the OPTS, and in training federal civil service directors so that we can show what the future can look like. We can show what we can build together and what that future can look like. Thank you so much. So at the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation, we believe this is just the beginning. By leaning into dialogue, trust, and co-creation, policymaking in Nigeria can become more inclusive, people-centered, and impactful. We also extend our appreciation to the Oil Producers Trade Section for sponsoring the training that sparked this conversation, and to the Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation for prioritizing the capacity building of civil servants. And to you, our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. What policy do you think could benefit from stronger public-private collaboration? Do share your thoughts with us on our platforms. Until next time, I'm Bukky Akinsemoyin, and this has been the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation podcast. Thank you.